Deus, o salutaris nostre, Domine ex Deus, Filii ex Deus, Deus noster, Domine ex Deus, Angeli, Pateti, Laudem Domino Majestatis.
Hey, how's everybody doing? Hope you're having a fantastic day. It is Monday, February 17th, and I'm back. I was away for a little bit. I was away for a few days. I had a trip to North Dakota, which I'm going to be talking about a little bit later in the week. I reached 20,000 subscribers, so we'll be having a 20,000 subscriber special sometime this week. And yeah, it's been busy, but I'm very glad to be back, very happy to be back. And remember, before we begin, become a patron at patreon.com/militanthomist. Where else are you going to get what I'm about to present you? It's true. I mean, this genre, there's nothing special about me, of course. It's just this genre, nobody really focuses on it. This type of material, nobody really focuses on it. So if you want more of this, if you want just more of it, if you want this to be promulgated in the halls of the entire world, then the best way of supporting this, besides, of course, liking and sharing and commenting, remember to like, is to become a patron. That provides a very solid basis to work from. So let's get right into it, because this is a controversial one. I'm sure many let Hassan in. I'm not letting. Oh my goodness. Wait, how does Hassan, are you sure your membership thing isn't on? Because you can somehow accidentally turn off your accept membership gifted memberships. I can gift, I can start a private stream and then, have you the only one watching and then gift you a membership. I can do that, but that's really weird that you've been so unlucky that you haven't gotten a membership yet. But I'll let Hassan in after minute 30. Because I need to cook for 30 minutes on this. Once I get into question and answers, I'll let Hassan in if he wants in. Okay. Anyways, yeah, I'm not am I lagging? I'm not lagging. You're messing with me. And yes, thank you for the super chat. Thank you for all the super chats. More Sultra, I really appreciate it. I'm glad that you're professing your love for Vatican II. I love Vatican II as well. But let's get right into it, because there's a bit of a controversial teaching of Vatican II. We all know about it. And this is the teaching of extra ecclesiam nulla salus, that outside of the church, and the church is the Holy Roman Catholic and Apostolic Church, there is no salvation. Now, many of you will be surprised to know that this isn't a teaching which is exclusively of the post-Vatican II magisterium. This wasn't something which happened to be made up in Vatican II. In fact, when it comes to the particular interpretation that is given in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, and then in Lumen Gentium, among other post-conciliar documents, this is an interpretation of extra ecclesiam nulla salus that has been present throughout the entirety of the tradition. Explicitly so, about around the time of the Council of Trent is when this began to be explicitly formulated. Although when it comes to the pre-Tridentine theologians, and I would even argue the Church Fathers, you can see that the principles of culpability, most especially culpability in the different ways in which you talk about necessity, these things were already present in those fathers, in those medievals, in the fathers and medievals, those before the Council of Trent. So this has been explicitly formulated in a very particular way for the last few centuries within the schools. And this was especially clearly formulated in the last century, and then received magisterial formulation in the late 19th and throughout the early 20th century, obviously culminating in the Second Vatican Council. And another interesting thing, actually, that you'll be very surprised by is that when it comes to the particular formulation of extra ecclesiam nulla salus that allows for those without a external communion with the church, that's how we'll phrase it, external communion with the church, that formulation is not merely a formulation which is present in the, bogus ordo sect. You know what I'm talking about. Those in full communion with Jorge Bergoglio. Actually, this is a doctrine which is taught throughout various different sedevacantist groups. This is a doctrine which was taught by Archbishop Lefebvre himself. So this isn't something which is merely unique to us, but rather it is exclusively a doctrine of a group called the Feeniites, which we'll be getting into the background of the Feeniites, what the heck the Feeniites are. But I kind of wanted to begin. Now, there's a few documents which are usually brought up about from Blessed Pius IX. These documents almost always get invoked. But what I really wanted to bring up is I wanted to bring up actually with a bit of a theoretical discussion first. So by theoretical, I mean that I actually want to talk about the concepts that are in play here, rather than at first simply throwing documents at you. We'll see how the Holy Office response to Father Feeney basically follows the outline that I present. And this is an article I just released. So if you actually wanted to go in and you wanted to read this rather than hear me talk about it, you can go to this article. This article, I think, basically goes over everything that needs to be went over. So if you want to share this to somebody and they're not really a live stream watcher or whatever it may be, you can go to my website, christianbwagner.com, and it should be one of the recent articles. I think I named it Outside the Church, There's No Salvation, Vatican I and Venerable Pius XII, because those are the three authors I go over. So when we say that outside of the church, there is no salvation, usually the way in which this is formulated within the theological manuals and in some of the magisterial documents is with the affirmation that the church is necessary for salvation. Simply says that the church is necessary for salvation. So there's going to be two important clarifications right there. The first is, what do we mean by the church? And the second is, what do we mean by necessary? So when it comes to the church, we usually use the word church in two senses. And this is present all throughout the tradition. This was formulated quite clearly by St. Thomas and gets picked up after him. But we use church in, on the one hand, the body, the external body, the juridical body, which was established by our Lord Jesus Christ. We talk about the church in that way. And then in this way, we can say, well, the church is really identical to the mystical body of Christ. It's really identical to the Holy Roman Catholic Church. But that's called the narrower sense of the term church. But the broader sense of the term church is simply the communion of the faithful. So all of those who are faithful. What's important about distinguishing between those two is when it comes to the second one, simply those who are faithful. This is going to include those who were before Christ, who died and were faithful. This is going to include catechumens, because remember, when it comes to that first sense, the narrower sense, it's only going to be those who are baptized and have not been separated from the church by heresy, schism, or excommunication. So when it comes to the narrower sense, catechumens, they're not included. Those before Christ are not included. Also not included are those who are, we would say, invincibly ignorant, which we'll talk about what that means eventually. But those are the two senses of the word church. So the theologians often ask, which sense of church are we using? Because it would be really easy to see if we said the church is necessary for salvation, and by the church we meant the broader sense, we simply meant all the faithful. It would be really easy to see how we can say, for example, catechumens are saved. and that catechumens have salvation even while they're not baptized. It would be incredibly easy to see this. But unfortunately, it's I guess unfortunately for ease of understanding, that's not really how the magisterial documents talk about it. The magisterial documents actually talk about it, it's seemingly in that second sense, in the narrower sense. So there's certain theologians like Melchior Cano, for example, they're going to take church as church in the broader sense, but this view is basically almost completely this is an ancient view that doesn't really have many modern supporters. And by modern, I mean in the last 400 to 500 years. So Cano held that view, but we kind of say he's wrong about that. So we actually mean church in the narrower sense. So the church in the narrower sense, that is the Roman Catholic Church, and that is, union with the Roman Catholic Church. This is something which is necessary. And by the church, we mean in the narrower sense. So this obviously is going to pose some difficulties, right? Because if we're going to say catechumens are saved, well, catechumens, they're not joined by baptism. If we're going to say that those laboring under invincible ignorance within certain Protestant sects or otherwise, that these individuals are saved, that's quite hard. It's quite difficult. And this poses kind of like the central crux of the issue. Well, really, how we're going to explain this matter is not only from explaining, not from explaining the term church, because church, we mean exactly what you think we mean. It's actually from talking about what necessary means and the way in which the church is necessary. So the theologians, when it comes to necessity, they'll often, and this is, I made a little chart right in front of you, often distinguish between necessity of means on the one hand and necessity of precept. So what the heck is the difference between necessity of means and necessity of precept? Well, necessity of means, and by necessity we mean that which is presented and required to achieve some end. So in this sense, it's going to be salvation. So necessity of precept is basically the superior tells you something to do, and you need to carry this out in order to acquire the end. It's a precept. It's some sort of command. So if you're somehow not able to carry out this command for whatever reason, when it comes to a necessity of precept, you're not going to be held liable for not carrying this out. So that's what necessity of precept is. So certain theologians, this actually provides us with a really easy way out. I'm trying to think of there's Pesch. Pesch holds this view. Pesch seemingly, I think this is a fair reading of Pesch. Pesch holds, well, it's kind of, easy to describe the necessity of the church in terms of necessity of precept. Simply, there's a necessity of precept. There's this command that is out there to join oneself to the church. And if one is not culpable in carrying out this precept, then therefore, they're good. And certain theologians are going to hold this. A lot of the bishops actually at Vatican I held this view, the necessity of precept. I think after Mystici Corporis that you can't hold to this view, but certain theologians nonetheless do hold to this view. So certain ones are going to say, well, it's easy. It's just a necessity of precept. It's not a necessity of means. But I don't really see how this view can be held for a number of different reasons, but that's kind of a story for a different day. And also, I think the opposition to Feeney is it teaches a necessity of means, which we'll see. So how in the world do we get around this? Because not only do we mean the stricter view of church, we also mean the stricter view of necessity. We mean that this is something not necessarily as a precept, but also as a required instrument for carrying out some sort of end. So if we go down here to this branch on necessity of means, really one of the ways is going to be, well, let's look at the two ways in which something could be of a necessity of means. And this is what's going to really mess up a lot of people in the issue of explicit faith, which I went into a little bit in this article and in a different article. And it's also going to mess up a lot of people when it comes to the nature of baptism, because baptism is not necessary by necessity of precept. It's necessary by necessity of means. But there can be two ways in which something is necessary by a necessity of means. On the one hand, something could be necessary by necessity of means as a term of absolute necessity. So when it comes to absolute necessity, by the very nature of the thing, it has that connection. Not merely connected in this way by the orderer. So the one who orders these things is going to, he's going to carry out the way in which, instruments relate to effects, but actually by the very nature of the thing, it's going to be connected this way. So, for example, sanctifying grace is necessary for salvation. The remission of sins is necessary for salvation. Faith is necessary for salvation. Charity is necessary for salvation. All of these things don't merely have a hypothetical or per accidence or disjunctive necessity. There's a few ways in which this is phrased, but rather it has an absolute or simple or per se necessity. So when it comes to membership in the church, since the establishment of the church by Christ is something which is contingent, since it's something which does not have this per se connection to the effect, it, like baptism, is going to be of hypothetical necessity. Now, when it comes to things of hypothetical necessity, we also call it things of disjunctive necessity. And things of disjunctive necessity, it acquires its end not only by an actual engagement with the means. So, for example, being actually baptized or being actually incorporated into the body of the church by baptism, but also in terms of desire. And in terms of desire, the effect is supplied by the one who is ordering, that is God. And this desire can be in two ways. It can either be explicit desire, and this explicit desire is going to be found in catechumens. So catechumens are going to be joined to the church in this way. And then it also, on the other hand, can be implicit desire. And implicit desire is going to be contained in any act of charity. So this is going to be for what we call the invincibly ignorant. So that's the general way in which we're going to outline or interpret this phrase. But we have to ask ourselves, okay, it's not enough just for us to throw out this scholastic explanation that's commonly given by the theologians. We actually have to go in there and read, is this the interpretation given by the documents themselves? So the first one that I want to go to is actually Vatican I. A lot of people don't understand this. Well, a lot of people don't know this, rather. But Vatican I actually had a fair amount of drafts that were never officially promulgated, but yet very strongly represented the positions of the bishops gathered together. So this is a very strong expression of the opinions of the Holy Father, of the opinions of the most eminent theologians of the time, and the opinions of the entire episcopate. Because they had a series of documents, they weren't promulgated, but these series of documents were still put before the bishops, and they expressed their agreement with them. And one of these documents is called the Second Constitution on the Church. Because basically what happened is you had this long 2-year process before the opening of Vatican I, where some massive group of some of the greatest theologians of the time, there was Father, was Perone Giovanni Perone a cardinal? I think he was a cardinal. Cardinal Perone, you had, or Father Perone, if I'm mistaken. You had Cardinal Franzelin, you had Kloiken, you had kind of the who's who of theology at the time. They came together under the immediate direction of the Holy Father, Blessed Pius IX. And, this is a very impressive gathering. And they went through and they, over a span of 2 years, hammered out this document. And this was the Constitution on the Church, and among other documents. But the Constitution of the Church, this was presented before the bishops after this long 2-year struggle, this long 2 years of work. And they realized when they presented it before the episcopate for consideration, before the Council Fathers, they realized that papal infallibility was such a contentious issue that it kind of needed a treatment of its own. It kind of needed a document of its own. So therefore, they decided to kind of stall the discussion of the rest of the ecclesiological issues, and they wanted to simply discuss the issue of papal infallibility. So they sat down, discussed the issue of papal infallibility, pastor eternas, all of that. We all know all of that stuff. So they got through all of that stuff over a matter of a few months, and that was the first constitution of the church. The second constitution of the church, after tabling it for a while, they went through, they read through it, they gave their comments, and there was some edits. They agreed with the content of the draft, but they disagreed with some of the style, some of the phrasing, minor points like that. So they wanted to quickly revise it before they went back and voted on it. So this is, as you can see from the Acta, this is something that the bishops, they were in agreement with. The episcopate at the time was in agreement with this. And after this, the second draft, they were going to go and vote on it. But unfortunately, we all know that Vatican I was actually cut short. Franco-Prussian War, Italian army marches on Rome. They have to dissolve the First Vatican Council before they can officially promulgate this document. But we actually have two versions, the first version and the second version. There's not much of a change, but we have these documents that the episcopate agreed with the content on. That presumably Blessed Pius IX agreed with the content of this as well, because it was under, of course, his watchful eye. And what we see is that there's actually, in both of these documents, sections treating extra ecclesiam nulla salus, properly explaining the dogma. And there was not a single bishop, there was not a single theologian, the Holy Father himself, nobody read this document and saw it as unorthodox. Absolutely nobody. And in fact, when you look at Feeney, as this is funny, what we'll see later, is when we look at Feeney, who does have a problem with this, he actually imputes the same sort of critiques of Blessed Pius IX, by the way. But that's kind of a story for later. But nobody at this time, when they read this, saw this explanation, which had already been common in the schools for centuries at this point. They didn't see any of this as unorthodox. So this is what the first draft is. It says, we teach that the church is not a free association. And by not a free association, it means it's not indifferent whether you're a member of it or not. As if it were indifferent to salvation, whether one knows it or is ignorant of it, whether one enters it or leaves it, but rather it is absolutely necessary. And this necessity is not only by the command of the Lord, so necessity of precept, by which the Savior prescribed that all nations must enter it, but also by necessity of means. And this is basically like in terms of content, but also by necessity of means. In terms of content, this is really the only thing that the episcopate kind of disagrees with content-wise. And this gets removed in the second draft because of this, because this was still an issue that was debated in the schools. They debated whether it was necessity of precept or necessity of means. But everybody, there's not a single person who was in disagreement that those that did not have external communion with the church could be saved. There's not a single person who disagreed with that. Out of all of the people, and trust me, all of the bishops read it, a bunch of them commented on it. Most eminent theologians were there at the time. This was leaked to the press. People read it. This was not something which was, secret, and there were like 3 guys working in a committee on this. So if there were any Feeniites around the time of Vatican I in the episcopate, on the chair of St. Peter, anywhere among all of the eminent theologians, they would have, saw this, what we're about to see, and they would have declared this heresy. But anyways, for according to the order of the providential plan of salvation, the communication of the Holy Spirit, the participation in truth and life, is not obtained except in the church and through the church, whose head is Christ. Furthermore, it is a dogma of faith that outside the church no one can be saved. However, those who, through invincible ignorance, labor under an inability to know Christ and his church are not on account of this ignorance condemned to eternal punishment, since they are not held guilty of this before the eyes of the Lord, who wills all men to be saved and to come to the knowledge of the truth, and who does not deny grace to one who does what is in his power, so that he may obtain justification and eternal life. Nevertheless, no one obtains this who departs this life culpably separated from the unity of faith. Notice this is basically an interpretation of Florence, by the way, which we'll talk about Florence later because I'm assuming a lot of people are going to ask about Florence. But anyways, nevertheless, nobody obtains this who departs this life culpably separated from the unity of the faith or from the community of the church. If anyone is not in this ark, he will perish when the flood rains. So this right there, that is that's the first copy of this. So the bishops, and I linked I gave the reference for the Mansi. So if anybody wants to read through all of the original documents, they want to read through all of the individual episcopal commentary on this, then they can go through the 51st volume. I gave all the column sections. So basically, the only critique, as I mentioned, was that they kind of had a problem with the language of necessity of means. And it wasn't because, they were like, oh, this contradicts Florence. Rather, it was because they're like, well, we know that there are people outside of external communion with the church who are saved. And this would seem to contradict that. So the general assumption is, the Vatican II error. The sense of the words, as gathered from the context, seems to require that it be necessary by necessity of means to be aggregated into the very body of the church through external communion. No sufficient correction is applied in the following chapter, where invincible ignorance is discussed. For there it is only asserted that those who suffer from this ignorance are not condemned for that reason, but not that they can be saved. So this is a critique that is leveled. They think that this needs to be clarified. And another one, from the context, it appears that no one at all has a path to salvation unless he professed Catholic doctrine and has been incorporated into this divine external society through baptism. I'm well aware that this rigid interpretation was by no means intended by the distinguished and excellent authors of the schema. Nevertheless, the words and explicit form of the text seem to convey it, or at least not to exclude it. So again, this is the episcopate is not jumping on these guys and saying, hey, do you know what Unum Sanctum says? Do you know what the Council of Florence says? Do you know what Lateran IV says, guys? They're not doing that at all. Why? Because the entire episcopate agrees with what had been explicitly taught in the schools for centuries at that point. The Holy Father himself agreed with this. Do you really not think that Blessed Pius IX would have, if he was a Feeneyite, would have stepped in and shut these guys down and said, hey, you can't do this? Do you really think he was that type of guy? It really, the Feeneyite, the entire narrative makes absolutely no sense of this situation. So here is and then I have the second version, which does not change it at all, and then the Relatio of Kloiken as well. So it says, relying on apostolic doctrine, the clear tradition of the fathers, and the decrees of our predecessors and councils, we define as a dogma of the Catholic faith. Outside the one Church of Christ, no salvation is to be hoped for. Moreover, we declare the meaning of this dogma to be this: all who die outside the church, whether they were ignorant of it through their own fault, whether they knew it but did not enter, or whether they entered but did not persevere. Notice there's three types of people. First, and this is going to be explained in the Relatio, whether they were ignorant of it through their own fault. So there's certain ignorance which is actually culpable. It's vincible ignorance. This type of ignorance is damnable. The people who do not enter the church through vincible ignorance, damned. Whether they knew it but did not enter, so they know the precept, but they don't do it, damned. Whether they enter but did not persevere, so you have people who are separated from the communion of the church, damned. Cannot enter eternal destruction, cannot escape eternal destruction, sorry. However, if anyone, through no fault of his own, so notice, this is an invincible ignorance, is ignorant of the church, not only is he not subjected by the just God to punishment for this ignorance, but if, by divine help, he keeps the law written in his heart and is prepared to obey God in all things, he may, by the working of divine grace, through the merits of Jesus Christ, attain justification and eternal life. Yet, if this occurs, this does not mean that such individuals are saved outside the church, since they belong to it in spirit. And they can belong in spirit precisely because they are prevented from external communion only by circumstances beyond their will. So he denies that these people are actually outside of the church because he says they belong to it in spirit. So, and then he goes on to explain this, explain why there were the slight changes. He says, in explaining the necessity of entering the church, the explicit distinction between the necessity of precept and the necessity of means, which was much discussed in the observation of the Fathers, has been omitted. This omission was made both because some justly remarked that it had a scholastic tone, and to avoid even the appearance, though not the reality, of contradiction with what is later stated regarding inculpable ignorance. However, the matter itself is still presented in such a way that the same necessity, which was previously called necessity of means, is still affirmed. So he's saying that when you use a language of necessity of means and you don't actually explain it very clearly, some people can misunderstand this and think that it would contradict what the church also teaches when it comes to invincible ignorance. And he said that he basically took it out because he didn't want people to misunderstand. Finally, regarding the explanation of the dogma, we hope that the most reverend fathers who wrote about it are satisfied. In the first part, where it speaks of those who die outside of the church through their own fault, special mention is made of culpable ignorance. So that's what I mentioned. Those are the three ways. Because some fathers wisely advise that the grave obligation must not be left unspoken, namely that anyone who's received some knowledge of the church or has begun to doubt his own sect is bound to seek the truth. Okay, so that's all from Vatican I. So this document was never promulgated. We must be very clear about that. It's kind of weird how the schema of Vatican I are traditionally, in a way, used as a very unique expression of the will of the episcopate. It actually is very often quoted in manuals as something authoritative, although obviously we know that it wasn't itself a formal declaration of the First Vatican Council. So it's not completely devoid of all authority, but it's also not equal to the authority of the promulgated documents of Vatican I. Okay, so that was from Vatican I, but we actually have something that happens later. And for those who don't know, there was this guy named Leonard Feeney. He was a Jesuit priest. Leonard Feeney, I think he started writing in the early 40s, if I'm remembering correctly, off the top of my head, around World War II. He started writing, and basically, he was an American priest up near Boston, but he had this idea of when we interpret the necessity of baptism, because the tradition says that baptism is necessary by necessity of means, that this means that there actually is a strict requirement for the actual application of sacramental water baptism, or else people are damned. So there's no baptism of desire, there's no baptism of blood. It's apparently the fable of the scholastics, so on and so forth. So he had that idea, and along with this idea was obviously a similar idea when it comes to membership in the church. So he would interpret the traditional declarations on extra ecclesiam nulla salus as somehow excluding from salvation anyone who is not externally incorporated into the church. So eventually what happens is the Holy Office, and this is under Venerable Pius XII, it was the Holy Office back then, and actually it kind of formed into the CDF today, or the DDF now. But the Holy Office does have magisterial authority, and this was done under the very careful watch, as we know from both the document itself and from secondary sources. It was done under the very close watch of Venerable Pius XII. So where this all starts is this actually all starts with a section from Mystici Corporis. What's interesting is Mystici Corporis, and I mentioned this in the article. It was written by a priest named Sebastian Tromp. And Sebastian Tromp was actually at Vatican II, and he aided in the writing of Lumen Gentium, including actually, and we can see this from the Acta and from the audio recordings, he actually was the one that, he wrote Mystici Corporis Christi, but he was also the one who was responsible for much of what was in Lumen Gentium, including the famous subsist sin. So you know how people say subsist sin, that's when Vatican II says that there's that the Church of Christ subsists in the Roman Catholic Church, and they say, oh, that's contradiction to Mystici Corporis Christi. Well, the same guy wrote both of those, Sebastian Tromp. So yeah, it's kind of funny. But anyways, the impetus, I guess, or the foundation for the refutation of Leonard Feeney actually comes from Mystici Corporis Christi. A section from this document gets exegeted in the response of the Holy Office to Feeney. Okay, so this is what the section from. It's section 103. It says, "As you know, venerable brethren, from the beginning of our pontificate, we have committed to the protection and guidance of heaven those who do not belong to the visible body of the Catholic Church, solemnly declaring that after the example of the Good Shepherd, we desire nothing more ardently than that they may have life and have it more abundantly. Imploring the prayers of the whole Church, we wish to repeat this solemn declaration in this encyclical letter, in which we have proclaimed the praises of the great and glorious body of Christ, and from a heart overflowing with love, we ask each and every one of them to correspond to the interior movements of grace and to seek to withdraw from that state in which they cannot be sure of their salvation." So this is what's going to be vital for the argument that's going to be drawn from exegeting Mystici Corporis Christi, is that it doesn't say that they're completely devoid of salvation. It says that they simply cannot be sure of their salvation. And then he goes on to explain this further. "For even though by an unconscious desire," so this unconscious desire is going to be the implicit desire, "and longing, they have a certain relationship with the mystical body of the Redeemer." So right here, it's not only affirming that they have this implicit desire, but it's also affirming that they have a relationship with the mystical body of the Redeemer. "They still remain deprived of those many heavenly gifts and helps which can only be enjoyed in the Catholic Church. And because they're deprived of these many gifts and heavenly helps, they cannot be sure of their salvation." Not that they absolutely are deprived of it, but they just cannot be sure of this. "Therefore, may they enter into Catholic unity and join with us in one organic body of Jesus Christ. May they together with us run on to the one head in the society of glorious love. Persevering in prayer to the spirit of love and truth, we wait for them with open and outstretched arms to come home to a stranger's house, not to a stranger's house, but to their own, their Father's house." So this gets interpreted by the Holy Office under Venerable Pius XII. So, you know, the one who promulgated this document, and actually the guy who wrote the response. Funnily enough, the guy who wrote the response was actually childhood friends with Venerable Pius XII. He was the head of the Holy Office at the time. Some weird Italian name. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. But this is especially evident when we look at the footnotes. So, for example, this text gets quoted: "Nor can we pass over in silence the profound impression of heartfelt gratitude made on us by the good wishes of those who, though not belonging to the visible body of the Catholic Church, have given noble and sincere expression to their appreciation of all that unites them to us in love for the person of Christ or in belief in God." So Venerable Pius XII. I mean, if I told you this was from like Pope Francis, there would be people who'd be getting pissed at this. He's saying that those outside of the visible body of the Catholic Church, they share with us in the love for the person of Christ and in belief in God. There would be some people who'd be pretty pissed at this. But anyways, we wish to express our gratitude to them all. We entrust them one and all to the protection, to the guidance of the Lord, and we assure them solemnly that one thought only fills our mind: to imitate the example of the Good Shepherd in order to bring true happiness to all men, that they may have life and may have it abundantly. So this is the section right here from Mystici Corporis Christi, gets interpreted when we look at the refutation of Father Feeney, which I am about to pull up right now, and I have it linked in the description for anybody who wants to read it. Okay, here we go. So this is and this is why I didn't remember his name. Look, Salviagiani, yes, the friend of Venerable Pius XII. Italian name, I can't pronounce it. Okay, so this is a document. I'm going to go through it. We're going to see that actually the very distinctions that I gave in the beginning are being employed in this. And then after that, if Hassan is still here, I'm going to bring Hassan on and we'll answer some questions about this, anything that you guys have. So it says, "This Supreme Sacred Congregation has very carefully followed the beginning and the continuation of the serious controversy raised by certain associations of the St. Benedict Center," so that's where the center that Lawrence Feeney started, "and of Boston College, concerning the interpretation of the maxim, outside the church, no salvation. After having examined all the necessary and useful documents on this subject, among others the file sent by your Chancery, the appeals and reports wherein the associates of the St. Benedict Center, okay, blah, 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 blah. The Sacred Congregation has reached the certitude that this unfortunate question was raised because the principle outside the Church, no salvation, has not been well understood or examined, and this controversy has become envenomed as a result of a serious lack of discipline on the part of certain members of the aforementioned associations, who have refused to give respect and obedience to the legitimate authorities. Consequently, the most eminent and most reverend cardinals of our Supreme Congregation decreed in a plenary session on Wednesday, 27th July, 1949. So the cardinals came together, the ones of the congregation, the Holy Office. They came together. They decreed this, what's following. And beside this, the Supreme Pontiff, in an audience on the following Thursday, 28 July, 1949, deigned to approve the sending of the following doctrinal explanations, invitations, and exhortations. So this is by Venerable Pius XII. This is the official explanation and determination of the question, approved by him and everything. He says, "We are obliged by the divine and Catholic faith to believe all those things contained in the Word of God, Scripture, tradition, and proposed by the Church for our faith as divinely revealed, not only by solemn definition, but also by our ordinary and universal magisterium. Now, among those things which the Church has always preached and will never cease to teach, there is also this infallible declaration which states that there is no salvation outside the Church." Great, okay? So we still affirm that. This dogma, however, has to be understood in the sense attributed to it by the Church herself. So you can't just interpret this dogma however you feel like it, which is what it's what all the Feeniites do. The Savior, in fact, entrusted explanation of those teachings contained in the deposit of faith, not to private judgment, but to the teaching of the ecclesiastical authority. Now, in the first place, the Church teaches that in this matter, there exists a very strict mandate from Jesus Christ, for he explicitly commanded his apostles to teach all nations to observe all things that he himself had ordered. So when it comes to this first point, what is the document saying? Well, to put it in scholastic terms, the document is saying, first, there exists a necessity of means, a necessity of precept. So on the very ground level, we know that there exists a necessity of precept, because this is something which is commanded to all men. But beside this, he goes further. The least of these commandments is not that which orders us to be incorporated through baptism into Christ's mystical body, which is the Church, and to remain united with him and with his vicar, through whom he himself governs his Church in visible manner here below. That is why no one will be saved if, knowing that the Church is a divine institution by Christ, he nevertheless refuses to submit to her or separates himself from the obedience of the Roman Pontiff, Christ's vicar on earth. So first, we say that any sort of knowledge that is had of this fact, and if there's a rejection, this is actually quoted in Lumen Gentium on this. But right here, if you know that it's true, reject it, damned. Not only, and then here he continues, not only did our Savior order all peoples to enter the Church. So right here, we don't only have this as a necessity of precept, but he also decreed that it is the means of salvation without which no one can enter the eternal kingdom of glory. So right here, magisterially, we have a determination of the question that we talked about earlier. Is it only a necessity of precept? Well, obviously, every single necessity of means is necessity of precept. So is it only a necessity of precept, though? No, actually, it's also a necessity of means. So this is the means which brings about the certain end. But, he continues, in his infinite mercy, God willed that, since it was a matter of the means of salvation ordained for man's ultimate end, not by intrinsic necessity. So right here, we have the distinction that I laid out. Notice all these scholastic distinctions perfectly fitting into the magisterial document. Not by intrinsic necessity. So it's not by an absolute necessity of means. Rather, it's not by an intrinsic necessity. So therefore, it's somewhat of a hypothetical necessity of means. Not by intrinsic necessity, but only by divine institution. Its salutary effects could also be obtained in certain circumstances when these means are only objects of, quote, desire or of, quote, hope. So this way is the disjunctive necessity that I talked about earlier. It's not only something which can be thus the end applied through the actual application of the means, but also through the desire. Right there. This point was clearly established at the Council of Trent with regard to both the sacrament of baptism and of penance. So, this idea of a necessity of means that's not of intrinsic necessity is something that we already have in our theology. We've already had it in our theology for a long time. There's plenty of, so for example, if somebody goes and they quotes St. Thomas on the necessity of membership of the church for salvation, I could quote back at them the text on the necessity of baptism for salvation or the necessity of penance for salvation. But each of these texts misses the fact that because these are, interpreting each of the texts in a way, in a Feeneyite way, misses the point that it doesn't exactly determine which species of necessity. It could, of course, mean absolute necessity, but it doesn't require that it mean absolute necessity. It could also be something of a hypothetical necessity, and therefore the means are disjunctive, either be actual or in desire, as St. Thomas clearly outlines when he talks about the necessity of baptism. The same must be said of the church as a general means of salvation. This is why, for a person to obtain salvation, it is not always required that he be de facto incorporated into the church as a member, which you're only incorporated into by baptism. But he must at least be united to the church through desire or hope. However, and this is and it goes even further, and this is like that last distinction that I gave. This desire can either be explicit or implicit. It says, however, it is not always necessary that this hope be explicit, as in the case of catechumens. So you have on that one end, remember that chart I showed you? On the one hand, you have the explicit desire, but on the other hand, when one is in a state of invincible ignorance, God accepts an implicit desire, thus called because it is implicit in the soul's good disposition, whereby it desires to conform its will to the will of God. So not only have, when it comes to this disjunctive necessity, we not only have a desire which is explicit, but also a desire which is implicit. So then it goes on to show that this is on the mystical body of Christ. So Venerable Pius XII, it goes on to prove that this is actually the teaching of Venerable Pius XII. So let me see, is there anything else that I wanted to go to before I go to questions? No, it doesn't look like it. It looks like I went over everything. If you want a little bit more, I went over it in the article, and you can read in the article. So I will be getting into questions, but give me 1 minute, okay?
If you really enjoy this channel, please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/militant Thomist. At the first level, you get access to the private Discord. At the second level, you get access to weekly bonus videos. At the third level, you get access to free translations, articles, and notes on the Summa of St. Thomas. On the fourth level, you get access to course videos and DM questions. And beyond this, there are many other benefits. So please make sure to check out patreon.com/militant Thomist.
Okay, I'm back. So I'm going to be answering questions now, and Hassan's going to get here. Yeah, I was not paying attention when I was reading the theses on the distinctions between the theologians. It gets pretty wild when they're distinguishing between, it doesn't need to be a valid baptism to incorporate into the church, or merely some sort of external presentation of the elements of the rite, or it doesn't need to when it comes to occult versus open, formal or material, heresy, schism, etc. I actually don't know the answer to this. Hassan, do you know the answer to this?
No, it doesn't exist, but everybody is no longer a member of the church upon excommunication, actually. According to commentaries I've seen on Canon Law anyway, on 1983.
Absolutely.
I can check it out and tell you next time I see you in the live chat on stream, if you just ask me, Justinus.
Remember to pray for Pope Francis. So true. Okay, so let's talk about the elephant in the room. The one that everybody's been worrying about, the the FQ, the Florence question. What are you? Okay, give me a second. Sorry, woman moment. Anyway, let's talk about the Florence question, Hassan, because that's a fun one, isn't it?
Yeah, give me 1 second. This internet enjoyer guy is a smart guy, but seems to like not know anything from authority. So I'm just trying to help him out. Sorry, man.
This man. Okay, I guess I will phrase the question then, since Hassan is distracted.
Yeah.
So the Council of Florence, there's a section in it, and it talks about a heretic or an excommunicate or a schismatic if they retain outside of the church until the end of their life, even if they shed their blood for the name of Christ, then they cannot be saved. So it seems like from this text, amongst other texts, that it would be very odd to sustain our interpretation of extra ecclesiam nulla salus, right? That's generally
That's
the
why it gets
situation.
brought up. Yeah. The
Yeah.
text basically disappeared from public consciousness until sedevacantism.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I actually saw. I was looking everywhere for different authors that talk about this, and the only one that I could see um, was actually Kano. Kano gave like a short treatment of it, but really, it doesn't get spoken of that much throughout the tradition. The Florentine text until oh yeah, and yeah, that's you're 1/18th the size. Yeah, I should fix this. Yeah, there we go. So it really gets ignored within the schools for a while. So how are we supposed to interpret this? Well, at least when it comes to the general way in which I treat this, it's pretty obvious when you're reading medieval theologians that they understand general moral theology when it comes to culpability. They understand this. They write about this. They know about invincible versus invincible ignorance. They know about formal versus material heresy. They know about formal and material schism. They know about all of these different categories. They write about it all the time. And the church has taught on these matters in many different places. The church has taught when it comes to, for example, condemning, I believe, the Jansenists. They said that, well, theoretically, you could have somebody being culpable for sin, but it just never happened. And the Jansenists were condemned for that. There's a lot of different individuals who get condemned for errors like that. So when we read those texts and we see heretic or schismatic, or etc., let's just keep it to heretic. When we see heretic, it would be very odd if we were to look at that text and assume that this meant either formal or material heretic. Now, why is that odd? Well, the reason that it's odd is that a material heretic is not, in the proper sense, a heretic. I actually quoted a letter from St. Augustine on Twitter. I believe off the top of my head, it's letter 32. He was writing to the Donatists, and he said, well, if you have somebody who is simply erring in good faith when it comes to a matter of faith, we can't really call this individual a heretic. Well, why? Because, I mean, when it comes to the determination of something, something isn't determined, that type of thing, actually from simply the matter, but also from the form. So, for example, if Hassan died right now on camera and his corpse was sitting there, that's not a person. That's not Hassan's corpse is not a person. It's not a man. It's not. It does not contain any more the formal principle. It does not contain the soul anymore. So you can call a heretic, a material heretic, a heretic, or a material schismatic a schismatic, in the same sense that you could call a corpse a person, which is only materially, not formal. So for me, when I read those texts, there's no internal necessity for actually interpreting those texts as talking about both formal and material heretics and schismatics. And we actually do know from their own writings, when they write about general moral theology, that they did know of these categories and they did apply those. They did apply those categories. So, Hassan, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, basically, you and I looked for a long time to try and find expositions of this part of Florence that were like quite early. And then this guy on the guy who's got his comment hidden on the Peter Diamond stream just dropped the Summa Dicensis and
Yeah.
the earlier reference. But yeah, it's gone over, and basically they make exactly the same point of the distinction between formal and material, and how the text is talking about it doesn't matter if somebody explicitly invokes the name of Christ in terms of them being able to be a martyr if they're a formal heretic. So the point is that if someone's a formal heretic, they're not going to heaven, even if they shed their blood for Christ while in that state, because they don't have charity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so what Palermo said is correct. Martyred can, while not being a true martyr before God and the church, can be one before God. So there's this distinction that gets, so for those who aren't familiar, there's a distinction that gets traditionally after Benedict XIV. I don't know if it's before Benedict XIV. I haven't seen it before Benedict XIV. When they're discussing martyrdom, this especially was brought back up in the late 19th century because there was this famous case of what are called the 21 martyrs. There are these various African martyrs. Half of them were Protestants, half of them were Catholics. And there's this distinction and it's employed by Benedict XIV, as I said, but it's a distinction between martyrs before God and martyrs before the church. So this idea is that when it comes to those who are in schism with the church, or those who, those in schism with the church, that it is possible that these individuals somehow did not, were not formal schismatics, and therefore are not culpable for their error, and therefore true martyrs. But this is only before God; it's not before the church, and therefore we shouldn't, as a matter of practice, canonize these people and venerate them as martyrs, because they're not martyred before the church; they're only martyred before God. Which brings us actually up to the difficulty when it comes to the Coptic martyrs, which are also 21 martyrs, aren't they? 21 Coptic martyrs. Game over for Hassan. I think your connection's bad.
Is it?
Yeah.
It's over. It might be that my computer's dying.
Yeah, your voice is not sounding too well. But yeah, Palermo is completely correct.
Yeah.
I eventually want to translate that section from Benedict XIV.
Dude, Benedict XIV needs to have like a reader written for him. Someone needs to go and like take all of his most important texts and just publish a volume. I don't know what's stopping them.
We declare, we proclaim, we define that it is absolutely necessary for salvation that every human creature be subject to the Roman Pontiff. Feels very hard to get around from unum sanctum. When it comes to this, I mean, would you say that subjection to the Roman Pontiff, that this is a precept, Hassan? Would you generally talk about this as something which is described as being necessary from a necessity of precept?
I think if we're referring to the break of the bond of charity by schism, then it's necessity of precept. And if we're referring to the like accepting the very doctrine of divine institution of the papacy, etc., then it's a matter of necessity of means.
I don't think so, because I think I don't think that would be an article of faith. It would be a dogma, but it wouldn't be an article of faith. So it wouldn't be necessary by necessity of means for all.
I don't know about that. I don't know why you would say that.
Well, I would say that because usually when it comes to those that are things which are to be believed by necessity of means, we only talk about the articles of the creed.
Okay, but like, what do the articles of the creed even mean if I believe in the Holy Catholic Church doesn't like refer to the...
Yeah, but I mean that would just simply be implicit, which are all the dogmas are implicit in the articles of the creed. I think this one is a lot easier to get around.
I don't know. I would need to examine the reason why this differentiation is made, because I don't really understand like, what do we mean by the creed as well? Why specifically the Niceno-Constantinopolitan Creed as the one where everything contained in there is an article of faith, and the other creeds are just dogmas? Like, why specifically that creed? That would
Yeah.
be my
Well,
point.
usually they talk about the Apostles' Creed, but this is like really weird because
Even then,
there's like theologians that go anywhere from like it's just that God is in the rewarder of those who are just, and then the incarnation and Trinity. It's only like those four things which are necessary by necessity of means. Anything else is like outside of that. And then there's other theologians that expand it to all the articles of the creed. So yeah, that would be quite interesting to adjudicate between them. But when it comes to your question in particular, it would be like I'll give a parallel example as like explicative that might be helpful also for interpreting the Council of Trent. Let's say if I said it is necessary that all men, in order to be saved, do not commit fornication. If I said that, obviously, if there was somebody who was in a circumstance where, let's say, they were, somehow rendered inculpable for their actions. Let's say they were, in a state where they were inculpably under the influence of a certain drug, and therefore they committed a sin simply materially. So they fornicated in a simply material manner. Whatever other sin that you want to insert, or any other example that you want to insert of how somebody is rendered inculpable for their action. You would say that it would be quite silly to, apply this phrase to a merely material sin, and not also to assume that the declaration is talking about something which is formal as well. So those texts really don't keep me up at night at all. I think, at least for myself, once you've determined and shown that these are things which are all over the general moral theology is something understood all over the tradition, that these concepts are really implicit and underlying a lot of these
I mean,
declarations.
the claim that, well, the imagination of a lot of people is that God only gives grace to people who fall into like these categories, such that someone would, for example, someone would have to accept as they receive faith that they are subject to the Roman pontiff. And if they realize that they must be subject to the Roman pontiff sometime after like becoming generically Christian, then they definitely didn't have faith until sometime after accepting submission to the Roman pontiff, and that's how they imagine it. But this is like completely contrived. It's just something from the imagination.
Mm. I'm not looking at the r/Catholic dating thing. Catholic Encyclopedia in the entry Sanctifying Grace talked about the minimal content of faith of one to be saved. Yeah, I talked about it in because personally, at least I think the more important one is where one is going to judge that the articles on the Trinity and the Incarnation belong, because there's like a minority of theologians that are going to say that these belong in that absolute necessity of means, the necessity of means per se that I mentioned earlier, and therefore the conclusion of this: if something is a necessity of means per se, it cannot be dispensed with. So there's going to be a lot of weird conclusions for this. I mean, the weird conclusions are that everyone before the Incarnation held with explicit faith the Incarnation of the Trinity, because if something is necessary by necessities of means per se, or an absolute necessity of means, it can't be dispensed with in any circumstance. So you'd have this before the Incarnation, then you also would after the Incarnation. There would be no situation where somebody who had not heard the explicit preaching of the gospel and these articles preached unto them, under no circumstances could these individuals be saved. So if you had that, interpretation, that's what you would hold to. But for me, I think that it is that God is the author of the supernatural order and the rewarder of eternal beatitude for those who are supernaturally just. Those two articles that St. Paul talks about, those are absolutely necessary or have a necessity of means per se. And then the Trinity and the Incarnation, they obviously have necessity of means, as is taught. I can't remember when the Holy Office taught this, but the Holy Office did teach this, that these have a necessity of means per accidents. And therefore, we can talk about people who are, in a Cornelius type situation after the incarnation. Seems like I've created more formal heretics in my life than Catholic converts. Doesn't that mean I've at least currently doomed people? Well, formal heretics can't be saved; they all go to hell.
Let's talk about moral hesitation. So I brought this up in the live chat, but St. Alphonsus Liguori puts out like very explicitly in the treatise on the theological virtues when he discusses faith, and on the treatise on conscience. He explains very clearly that it's not enough for someone to just hear that somebody believes in something that happens to be a true article of faith, right? So if you go up to a Muslim and say the Trinity is true and like the incarnation happened, and he looks at you dumbfounded, and he's like, "Why on earth would I believe that?" That's not that he. You haven't just like vincibilized his ignorance. That's not what it
Yeah.
means. You've rendered somebody's, or rather, somebody's ignorance is rendered vincible at the point where it is quote unquote conquerable, because vincible means conquerable, right? When it's able to be overcome. And the point where we say that somebody's ignorance is vincible is the point where they have a moral hesitation about the truth of their actually false religious opinion or sect. At the point where they realize that they need to do some investigation, if they then reject and refuse the necessity, the obligation of investigation, then they mortally sin. So even if somebody was invincibly ignorant and in a state of grace, and then suddenly their ignorance became vincible, and then they refused to investigate out of pride or fear or whatever it was, then they would not be in a state of grace anymore. So somebody who is in a state of grace and invincibly ignorant can receive a challenge to their falsehoods and commit a mortal sin and fall out of grace and then go to hell. So basically, the situation that you're in is not a situation like that, because all you've done is go up to someone and autistically tell them that they should become Catholic. You haven't. Somebody's not going to be like, "Oh, a conviction deep in my soul tells me that I should investigate what this young man has just said." No. Oh, good question. If someone investigates and comes to the wrong conclusion, we say that the moral hesitation subsides. They've done what they could, and an intellectual error is not a sin, so they don't fall into a sin through incorrectly resolving the issue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's that's actually why when it came to the text of Vatican I, they added in the section on culpable ignorance, because they wanted to clarify this point to say if you have somebody who is in a false sect and has some sort of understanding or at least some sort of hesitation about the truthfulness of their sect, then they're required to try to, in matters of salvation, this is the axiom in matters of salvation, you can't use probability, which is why you couldn't use probabilism for the sacraments, for example. So you're required to, seek out divine revelation. You're required to put to rest that doubt that one has. That's why this gets actually added into the documents explicitly. There was something else that, so somebody says, is the filioque necessary for salvation? We have to remember that there are a lot of dogmas that are presented to us that are not necessary for all for salvation. It would actually be insane if you had to have like explicit knowledge of all of the dogmas ever promulgated by the church. Like basically everyone would be going to hell if that was the case. Rather, we distinguish between, on the one hand, explicit faith and on the other hand, implicit faith. So by holding to the articles of the faith and the sacred authority of the church and explaining those articles, one implicitly holds to all of the dogmas. This is a pretty old concept. Trying trying to remember, is this like a explicitly a patristic distinction, or is this just a medieval distinction? I can't remember off the top of my head. Burr doesn't know. So this is something else important that I wanted to bring up. Right here, what Nama said: "Invincible ignorance doesn't save. The invincible ignorance needs to seek God in all His might and stay away from sins." Yeah, so this is very important when it comes to invincible ignorance. Invincible ignorance is not a means of salvation. When we talk about invincible ignorance, we're talking about whether somebody is culpable or not for an error. So, for example, if I, no, not I, if somebody, committed some sort of sin and was inculpable due to some sort of, impediment that made them not culpable for their sin. The very fact that they're inculpable for some one thing does not mean that they're like positively just or anything like that. So just because somebody is not guilty for their ignorance of the true religion does not mean that they are somehow in a state of grace or anything like that. You need to be in a state of grace and be making acts of charity, perfect contrition. You can't just the very fact that you're ignorant does not mean that you're just. So invincible ignorance is not a means of salvation. It's a common misunderstanding.
Its invincibility is merely a characteristic of ignorance which renders it compatible with grace. That's it. It doesn't mean that you have grace because you're invincibly ignorant. That would be a really weird Pelagian error, I think. Like a really weird one.
If you can't articulate hylomorphism on Judgment Day, you're damned. Does invincible ignorance apply to schismatic groups? So schism is slightly different than heresy. So when it comes to heresy, there's both an intellectual and a volitional aspect to heresy. Just like there's both a intellectual and volitional aspect to faith. Is because one's considerations, blah, 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 one has a sort of intellectual assent that's motivated by an act of the free will. So there's both a volitional, intellectual aspect to this. But when it comes to schism functions more like how we normally think of other moral matters. So when it comes to schism, we could think about it like we would of adultery or fornication or, lying, blasphemy, any number of sins against charity. We can think about it very similarly. So when it comes to schism, schism is some sort of break of union with the Roman pontiff or those in which he is in communion with. So if somebody simply, because schism is an act of the will, somebody simply grows up in a schismatic community and does not make a morally informed act of the will to sever themselves from the unity of the church, this person is not committing the sin of schism. The person's merely, what we call a material schismatic. And if there's no form to something, it's not the thing. So that individual is not culpable in this way. So it's not only invincible ignorance that can cause one not to be culpable for their schism, but any of the other number of different things which may reduce culpability in an individual, which is beyond ignorance. So yeah, functions slightly different. Okay, so do the Coptic martyrs not receive any grace of martyrdom, or are they cut from salvation under Florence despite being added to the Roman calendar? We already talked about this. If the Coptic martyrs were formal schismatics, of course they're not going to receive any grace of martyrdom. That's what Florence says. But if they weren't formal schismatics, then yes, they would receive the grace of martyrdom. But according to the common opinion, they would be martyrs before God, but not before the church, which I don't know. Do you sort of take the view that they are that this is obviously a valid act, adding them to the martyrology, but this is something that just shouldn't have been done because of the
Do you mind?
traditional opinion?
Well, let's. I want to talk about the prudence afterwards. First, I want to talk about the authority of the modern martyrology. That's okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So, this came up with a friend earlier, but there is a quote here from bro. I hate when Discord just suddenly skips to another part of the messages. So here's a quote from Reverend Antoine Morel, S.J., The Church and the Sovereign Pontiff, an Analytical Catechism, approved translation of the third French edition by Reverend Patrick Costello, C.C., 1878. This is from chapter 18, article 2. He says, "Are we to presume to think that our Lord Jesus Christ, who has promised to be with his church at the end of time, would withhold his assistance in so important a decision wherein the purity of public worship is so deeply interested? Could we suppose that the Church, which shall forever honor and invoke the saints and place them upon her altars, might propose damned souls for the veneration of the whole faithful, and implore the assistance of enemies of God? It is only the impious or heretic who would raise difficulties in this matter, and deny to the Apostolic See the infallibility which we grant to it. Benedict XIV calls their opinion scandalous, rash, and injurious to the saints, etc. He also calls it temerarious. The author doesn't mention that. It is precisely to obviate this grave inconvenience that the Church has revised the Roman martyrology and erased from it names which were slipped in before there were regular formalities of canonization." Okay, so this is very important. I want to mention here that the primary reason for the infallibility of canonizations is that the whole Church has these individuals proposed for their veneration, not merely proposed, but even commanded liturgically, right? Now, the Martyrology is a liturgical book, therefore, etc. Now, here's a problem, though. Many editions of the Martyrology contained names which were added by editors, not by the promulgation of the sanctity of a particular soul by the Roman Pontiff. There are many cases of this, like Josaphat and Barlaam, and various other ones. These names were removed. Now, other names were removed, not for this reason, but because the individual souls that are named here became blamed or used as false witnesses to doctrines that cannot be held, and sometimes as true witnesses to doctrines that can no longer be held, or which they were ignorant of being impermissible in their time to hold. And so in the time of like Baronius and other people at that time, for example, Clement of Alexandria was removed from the Martyrology, specifically because he had said some things which the neo-Gnostics were using to justify their views. So there are lots of issues with this. As I said, the Martyrology is complicated, but the more modern Martyrologies only contain names of saints who were added by the promulgation of an edition intentionally by the Roman Pontiff containing these names, intentionally with these names added to them. So in these texts then that are in the Martyrology, the Roman Pontiff proposes and commands for all of those who are bound among the faithful to pray the Martyrology, to venerate these souls. So that's why there's a problem with making a contemporary distinction between the infallibility of additions to the Martyrology by papal command and canonizations. So that's why I would argue that the 21 Coptic martyrs are in heaven. However, Christian knows there are some things that I will not say publicly, but I think that many individual souls who have been proposed and commanded for veneration by the faithful should not have been. Many, mostly because many of their actions should not be imitated and were materially sinful. or because many of their beliefs are not clearly differentiatable from those which lead to heresy or lead to spiritual harm at the very least. And also, there are many individuals who canonizing them was not for the actual purpose of the canonization of the saints, which you can read if you read the Prenotanda. The Prenotanda of the 2004 Martyrology explains why we have canonizations, which is that canonizations are a matter of the secondary object of the magisterium. The secondary object of the magisterium is different to the first. The primary object of the magisterium is matters of faith and morals. The secondary object of the magisterium is everything necessary, or judged rather as expedient or necessary by the church in the preservation and guarding of this deposit of faith and morals. Why does canonization pertain to this category? Because in scripture, holy souls are promised to the church. And so there has to be some substantiation of that. And those substantiations are fittingly taught not only authoritatively, but infallibly. So when you, let's say hypothetically, a bunch of people are canonized in order to canonize something along with them, right? So you're not canonizing just the souls, or you're not even intending primarily to canonize the souls, but you're intending to canonize something along with or instrumentally by those souls. For example, an ecumenical council or certain ways of speaking, etc. That's obviously wrong. That should not be your attention. You should not be, for example, I would say that even if somebody was canonized just because they were a very strong defender of Thomism, that would be really bad. Someone should be canonized because they were saintly. Those aren't the same thing, right? So you can see that there are times when you can see that there are various times when the decision to teach something authoritatively, even the decision to teach something infallibly, is not always a moral decision. And sometimes they're very unwise, but they're not necessarily immoral. One of the classic examples for this is the bull Unigenitus condemning the errors of Quesnel, one of the later Jansenists. And this uses the technique of global censure, which means that it condemns like 80 propositions. I don't remember exactly how many. It condemns 80 errors. And right at the end, it goes, some of these are pernicious. Some of these sound bad. Some of these are proximate to heresy. Some of these are actually heretical. Some of these are just erroneous. And I'm not telling you which is which, which is really bad. Which is really bad because some of those propositions are true, but written badly and misleadingly in an absolute way. Some of those propositions are true, but are written in a way that was harmful for that era and maybe not in other eras. And other of those propositions are heretical. So not knowing the difference is kind of really bad. So yeah, it's an infallible act of the magisterium, but that doesn't mean it was morally right to do it, right?
Yeah, and I think this would follow over from what was said here. When we say canonized saints are safe to venerate and imitate, what precisely is meant? So the primary object of canonization is the fact that they are in heaven. So that's what's infallible in there. But there is a habitual safety that the magisterium has. That, like, generally speaking, these individuals are going to be safe to imitate and are going to have certain virtues. But there are certain lapses that ought not to be imitated. So it's not like when we say canonizations are infallible, we don't mean that every single thing reported of this saint ought to be imitated by us, and that this is never. And Mr. Dreamless Sleepwalker, how do recent saints and martyrs say about the importance of maintaining friendships? I'm just gonna say I'm not befriending your girlfriend on Twitter. I'm sorry, dude. Can't follow her on Twitter. But anyways, let's continue, Hassan. Do you have anything to say about that?
The kayak message, or
no, not the kayak message. not the kayak message. The message about being saints being safe for imitation. I would basically interpret it like I would the ability to critique the magisterium for other aspects of teaching besides.
So I'll put it this way. The safest way, but not absolutely safe, way to know what to imitate from the saints is when you read the text of the canonization, the text of the beatification, etc. You often find yeah, maybe we should delete that. You often find texts. You often find texts which are going to tell you explicitly they did X great thing, they did this or that great thing, they should be remembered for it. They also the text will often like include, especially for the beatification, like a list of their virtuous acts, right? Obviously, those aren't infallible judgments of fact, but they're still useful, right? So when we have good things proposed to us by the church, we at least know that hypothetically, if they did those things are worthy of imitation, right? So even if they didn't really do those things, and even if their intentions in those issues were actually muddled because we can't see into their hearts, right? In principle, what's being described by the magisterium ought to be imitated. And of course, they ought to be venerated because what's the cause of veneration? St. Thomas explains that the reason that we call veneration of the saints dulia is because we stand as servants in relation to them, because in the state of glory they participate in God's judicial authority, and so they are our lords in comparison to servants, as St. Paul says that the saints judge over the angels. Okay, so I have a file on this I can post actually, but yeah, so
Yeah, and
that's
also, by the way, why do Jacques
that's just
Jack
false. I was going to
De
mention that. That's
Angelis?
just
Yeah,
false.
this is just fake. This is just completely fake. This is
Bro,
like
you
a
have
weird
the saints
diarism.
who went into swamps to like get bitten by mosquitoes until they nearly died for penance.
Yeah, they had saints who would like wrap themselves in iron chains and it would rub their skin raw until maggots would grow in their flesh. And they had saints who lived on pillars. I mean, these are saints which we share with them.
Yeah.
These were saints of God, and they're in heaven, and they did many heroic things. But yeah,
What?
sometimes
Yeah.
they do things
What
like that.
matters is a good intention. Just because somebody has a good intention doesn't mean that they understand all of moral science and all of the philosophical reasons for those issues of moral science. For example, in scripture, um, there is oh my goodness, dude, what's her name? The one who lied to save the Israelite spies.
Oh, the cord.
That's so bad. It begins with an R.
Rahab.
Rahab, thank you. Okay, so Rahab lied. She was obviously invincibly ignorant that lying is always wrong, because that's a difficult precept to know in the state of fallenness. And she was an uneducated prostitute. But many of the saints say that not only did she do a good deed by her intention and by its motivation of the love of God and the love of people of God, but she even merited supernaturally for the action. So So we should remember like things like that. When you read about an early modern saint drinking like pus collected from the wound of a patient because she was like grossed out by how smelly the patient was, and then felt like she lacked in humility, and then made an oblation to God of the suffering of drinking the pus. That's gross, and people shouldn't do that. But her intention was good, so it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter in terms of the subjective effect.
Yeah, sorry off topic, but just finished Feingold's Intro to Fundamental Theology. What should I read next on fundamental theology, especially on the Magisterium, the Grades of Ascent? Thanks and God bless. You should read Doranzo.
So
Doranzo is a good next text because he includes stuff on Theologies.
yeah.
Besides the stuff on fundamental theology, he also talks about Intro to Theology, De Locis, and then De Ecclesia as well. And he's writing after Vatican II, so he actually incorporates some of the text from the Second Vatican Council in his overview. So yeah, that would be a good next one. It's called The Science of Sacred Theology. It's pretty good and it's pretty accessible as well.
Bro, the text is moving very fast. What's going on in the chat? Oh, it's because of the live chat didn't catch up on my stream.
Oh, okay.
Anyway, I
Um,
posted the link to my notes on Dulia from St. Thomas so you can understand the basis of the safety of the veneration of the saints who like have weird life examples.
yeah, it's really strange when the Eastern Orthodox use this as a polemic of all things. It's it's uh it's like remember the old Orthodox Kyle video
Hmm.
where he talked about like the East, I mean the West. They're like in like the Platonism and Aristotle East and West, and therefore they hate the body, and therefore they have all of these saints who destroy the body through fasting and stuff.
Mm.
What does Hassan have to say about the saints? Have to say about the importance of 4-year friendships over answering live super chats to Christians' live streams?
I think that answering questions on a live stream takes about an hour and a half a pop maximum, and maintaining some 4-year long friendships would take perhaps over a week of work that I cannot give. So,
Thank you for the answer, Hassan. In Quodlibet 9, St. Thomas says popes can be formal heretics. No, he doesn't. Okay. Next
oh my
question.
goodness.
Yeah, could you
It's
actually
like
give the question and article, because
do you want me to
Quodlibet
do it?
9 literally tells you nothing.
Quadlibet
That's like
9.
saying like St. Thomas says in like Secunda question 170. It's like, well, that doesn't really tell you much. Um, can you at least apologize? That's all I want.
Um, well, I'm sorry that I hurt your feelings by speaking imprecisely and being misinterpreted. Uh, and I also apologize that I wasn't more meticulous in that case. I was in a situation where I was trying to help somebody who I saw not getting help for 3 years of sniffing around random boys on the internet.
Regarding the sexual canonization? No way. I've read this one like 20 times.
No way. There's no way.
Yeah, yeah, I've read this one like 20 times. Um I'm just gonna read the whole thing since it's here. Okay. Something can be judged possible considered according to itself, which is found impossible related to something extrinsic. Therefore, I say that for the judgment of those who are over the church to err in any matters, if only their persons are regarded, is possible. Whereas if divine providence were to be considered, which directs its church by the Holy Spirit, so it might not err, just as he promised in John 16:13 that the Spirit coming would teach all truth, namely concerning things necessary unto salvation, it is certain that it is impossible for the judgment of the Church Universal to err in these things which pertain to faith. Hence, the sentence of a pope, to which it pertains to determine concerning faith, which he proffers in judgment, must stand more than the opinions of any wise men in their writings, since Caiaphas, although wicked, is still read because he was the pontiff, who have prophesied unknowingly in John 11:51. Whereas in other sentences, which pertain to particular facts, as those concerning possessions or concerning crimes or concerning things of this sort, it is possible for the judgment of the church to err on account of false witnesses. The canonization of saints is a middle between these two, since, nevertheless, the honor which we exhibit to the saints is a certain profession of faith, by which we believe in the glory of the saints. Piously, it must be believed that not even in these matters can a declaration of the church err. Okay. Where, Trendy, what's going on here?
Trendy, what the hell?
What?
Oh, Trendy, no.
He compares the Pope to the chief priest Caiaphas.
No, Trendy, no.
Trendy, I have a syllogism that, can you solve it for me? Um, I cannot eat raw meat. I buy raw meat from the store. Therefore, I cannot eat the meat I buy from the store. Can you refute it? Can you refute it, Trendy? In honor of President's Day, who are your favorite presidents? My favorite president, Richard Nixon. Who's your favorite president?
Living or dead?
Any. Why would it have to be living?
Pope Francis. No, actually, that's actually false. I don't know why I said that. Definitely not FDR.
FDR sucks. He's my least favorite president. Besides Lincoln, they
Yeah.
both suck. Yeah, Nixon bros unite. Yeah, I'm with Dick.
Nixon's
I'm with
okay.
Dick. So true. Literally me for real, for real.
What does this even mean? Okay, internet enjoyer. I think I would really like to sit down with you sometime and go over a lot of these weird mistakes that you're having in some detail. Jacob No Darkness, if that's a joke, that's very offensive and you shouldn't say that.
Oh wait, never mind. It's not funny.
Check my so the last message I posted, internet enjoyer, is my Discord. If you add me on there, then when I get some spare time, we can talk through these misconceptions in detail, because you basically just don't know what we believe and don't know what we have believed for a long time. So you can't. I don't know where you get your knowledge from, because you know of many topics to ask about, but your information on those topics is so weird. I don't know how to make sense of it.
Okay, so I'm assuming this question is for Hassan. What if a person was mad about you breaking a promise I took very seriously, rather than your total ignorance of a situation you have zero understanding? I don't know what this is about. I was
real.
I was doing other stuff. I think I remember I was in the Madrid airport. But why don't you like FDR or Lincoln? I'm woefully uninformed. Well, FDR, he basically is the foundation for a lot of the, how do I put it? He's a foundation for a lot of the moral decay coming from the courts in the last century or so. Well, not century or so, I guess last 70, 80 years. So FDR, that's why he sucks. He was a communist. He was dumb. He couldn't even walk. Don't like him at all. Lincoln sucked because he basically destroyed any sort of semblance of independence for the states of our great union. And he kind of laid the groundwork for the expansion of the federal government. Basically the practical destruction of the constitutional system as we know it. And also, my state national anthem, Maryland, My Maryland, calls him the tyrant. It's kind of funny. But yeah, I don't like Lincoln. And I don't like FDR. Although FDR's economic policy was not bad. His social policy was trash. Okay.
Is that your notifications?
Maybe. I know Kayak. I did put it up for Hassan to answer it. I don't really know what to do with this.
I don't really know, like, this is like wildly inappropriate, and I'm not going to go into detail. I can't really answer that without going into like people's private things, and I'm not really gonna do that.
How is
Deep
FDR
Life
the cause
says,
of
please
moral
keep me in your
decay?
prayers. I'm going through a bad spiritual low. I will ask all the Moriscos to pray for you. Hold on.
Oh my gosh. FDR is the first president to wield the powers of the executive in the way that the founders actually envisioned as a king. But he didn't go as far as he could have, which is scary. I don't care. I'm going to be honest. I don't really care about I'm a huge fan of a strong executive. Huge fan of a strong executive. Huge fan of a strong legislature. Not a huge fan of a strong judiciary. The judiciary, but the problem that I have with the FDR era is actually the manner in which the judiciary usurped its powers. I don't have as much of a problem with the executive branch becoming powerful. I guess my two issues would be a stripping of the rights of states, and especially of the rights of state legislatures to determine matters which are not outlined in the Constitution. It's explicitly given in the 10th Amendment. That's the right given to the states. I mean, the entire function of the Bill of Rights was to uh, have the acceptance of the Constitution by limiting the federal government, and to leave proper powers to the states. So I have a problem with the overexpansion of federal powers over state powers, which is basically eliminated um, during the time of Lincoln. So that's why I don't like Lincoln. And I also have a problem with the judiciary. The ascendancy of the judiciary is basically like a supra legislature, which is why I really don't like the FDR era. I don't have problems with FDR's economic policy, although I did call him a communist. And he basically, to be honest, I think he was probably following a lot of Rerum Novarum. But uh, I don't have as much of a problem with his, the ascendancy of the executive or his economic policies. It's really the ascendancy of the judiciary is basically like the super legislature, which has just wreaked havoc on the ability of state legislatures to legislate within their sphere. Yeah, the secession of the southern states was legally legitimate. So true. Was Jefferson? Yeah, my favorite president, Jefferson Davis. He was educated by the Jesuits, right? Wasn't he? Blessed Pius IX. He sent him a warm letter. So he was the first Catholic president of America, Jefferson Davis.
Mr. Wagner,
What?
people are the people, or at least one person. I'll speak by metonymy. The people are upset that you mentioned Trulia's quote unquote undisclosed moral error for 30 seconds. What do you think of this?
Trulia. I haven't talked about Trulia.
Long time ago, you talked about Trulia, and you talked about that one thing for 30 seconds.
I don't remember doing this.
I don't remember you doing
I mean,
this.
it's already publicly available information. Did I disclose
It
this?
is. It is public information, so that's why I was hoping you were going to say that, because it's just not undisclosed. It was very public, very extremely
Yeah, I mean, his
public.
wife was writing about it on Facebook. How much more,
Yeah.
unpublic
Well,
can it get?
at what point does something become disclosed, bro?
Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean, that's like, yeah, that's
this is
sad. And I
the
mean, we because this is why didn't anybody complain about this with the whole Aquino situation? I mean, Aquino, he's a pervert. He's been a pervert for a long time. I just figured out about it. Apparently, all you guys knew that Aquino was a pervert and that he was doing all these things with women. He's a creep. He's a coomer. Everyone knew about it apparently, but nobody wanted to say anything because they were all scared of saying something.
I just
They all
want
knew about
to. I
him. He
do
wreaked
want to say.
havoc.
I do want to say.
They let him
Not,
be a public apologist in a pseudo
yeah, that's the
scholastic
problem.
because we
I
think
do
that
want
we're
to say.
supposed to just cover for the
You
sins
know,
of other people.
I know
That's
a
not
lot
acceptable.
of people. I know a lot of people on Discord who've confided stuff that's at least almost as bad as what he did, right? And the problem is that I see the same people clowning on him for what he did. You guys out there who have private faults that haven't yet been made public, remember who you are before you attack people for what they do. That's become public. So, on the other hand, when people talk about when something is sus, it should be investigated. Otherwise, we end up with kids getting violated by clergy. Like, the mentality about like sins of like disclosing the undisclosed and whatever that you see nowadays is just not compatible with it's not compatible with any like sane sense of vigilance over the public good. So
Yeah, that was FDR created the welfare state. Yeah, you forgot the Giga Chad. Doesn't a strong executive conflict with a state's right issue to an extent? No, it doesn't, because I mean, a strong executive would be like a strong executive in his own sphere. So, like for example, I can, be a very strong and strict leader of my family. Let's say, let's say I keep a tight, keep it, orderly, keep it, strict in my household. That doesn't mean that I keep strict some other guy's household, or if I had grown children and they had kids, that I keep strict their household. It would just mean in my sphere. Oh, kayak! I saw the
oh
100 pop
man.
up. What did he say?
Christian, did you answer Anglo Schizo's question about the convulsionaires?
Wagner, why you be skipping my super? Did I?
Didn't see
Apologies if I did. Oh, congrats on the 20K. Okay, I feel really bad about skipping
it.
that
Oopsie
one.
daisies.
Thank you, I appreciate it. We're gonna have a 20K celebration sometime soon. Can you believe we're at 20K now, Hassan?
Yes.
You can believe it? Do you think it
Yeah.
was?
I think you'll make 200K.
No way. No way.
You'll do it.
I think I'll
Anyway,
probably
so
top out around 50. I think
I don't think so. So Anglo, I don't think so because, well, we'll talk about it later. But so Anglo Schizo said, what was the reason for Jesuits denying miracles from Jansenists while also using miracles as proof against Protestants? Isn't that a double standard? What do you think of this?
Sorry, I'm looking at the.
It just seems like a really. I mean, Anglo Schizo seems like a nice guy, but this just seems like a really bad logical error.
I don't know. I didn't even hear what you were saying. I was too busy.
What was the reason for the Jesuits denying miracles from the Jansenists while also using miracles as a proof against Protestants? Isn't this a double standard?
I mean, read. Have you read about the Jansenist miracles? When they when you read the theologians talk about the Jansenist miracles, Benedict XIV actually talks about this. The Jansenist miracles are like, we can cut our balls off without like seething in pain. They were like, yeah, we have these ecstasies and people beat the crap out of us while we're on the ground and we don't move. Those were the Jansenist miracles. They were from demons, very clearly. We could say that from the moral circumstances of a supposed miracle that we can discern that it's not from God. So yeah, it's a false equivalency. But I wouldn't even have a issue per se with the Jansenists or some of the Jansenists having miracles, as I concede for some others. But Kayak, he says,
Oh
okay, I
man,
donated $10. Can he apologize for
that's
breaking
not
the
$10.
promise to me?
That isn't
I'll
$10.
totally and
Look
utterly
again,
destroyed
flipped.
over, or a bare minimum acknowledge it a
Christian,
single time to me over his total misunderstanding of a situation. I am blocked
Christian,
over Discord. Yeah.
Christian. That isn't $10. He slipped.
Oh, did he mean to send $10?
He did. He said 10, but it's not 10.
Oh yeah.
It's pretty bad.
I know. I'm not going to skip your other guys' super chats. I just wanted to.
Okay, look. I did not. Okay, if you want me to do this on stream, I mean, you unblocked me. You always could have sent me a message over Discord and we could have talked about it. But since you want me to do this on stream, I can't apologize for breaking a promise I did not intend to break. I specifically went not to do what I promised not to do, or that which you and I had an understanding was something that you could not have your friends do to you. Right? What I was trying to do was help somebody with a formation issue that they've had for years, never solved, and were continuing to manifest. And you may say something like, well, it's a matter of interpretation, and if you're speaking to a woman, they'll say X, Y, Z, or whatever. But the point of the matter is that I was working with what I thought was necessary to work with, and I actually wanted
whatever you were doing to work out and become something very good. So you guys misinterpreted me. I read the conversation over many times. There was a line in there that I can see being misinterpreted. That's why I apologize for speaking badly. But this was something that you could have asked me about a long time ago. Instead of cutting things off, I immediately messaged her and said, "Why did this guy just block me? You know what? I just don't have the time and effort in me right now to handle this. So if this is how he wants to throw away, you know, a friendship that we've had for years, then this is how he wants to do it." And then it didn't go anywhere. So, look, I'm sorry, but I just I can't. The way things are, whenever there is a whenever there is an issue with you, the way things are, where somebody has to like basically defeat you in a debate about intentionality or some shit, right? Like, I'm not as smart as you. I can't like beat you in a debate, but that doesn't mean that nothing I say is ever right and you're wrong. In any case, you're much smarter than me. But that doesn't mean that you're always correct when we disagree about something. And I just can't have any conversation with you where like the whole point of the conversation is basically me having to like argue you into submission, basically, in order for the situation to be rectified. It's just not going to happen. So, yeah. Also,
yeah, I would refund it as well, but unfortunately, I can't refund it.
I think you should refund it.
I literally can't. I don't think it gives me the option. Or I would have just refunded it instantly and not had the question answered. But what's your opinion on Muhammad mythicists?
I think I've talked about this on stream before. It's not a historical theory that I want to dignify speaking about on in a public platform very much. I really don't think it's to be taken seriously. I actually work with a couple of people who take a Muhammad mythicist position because we're trying to help the same group of people. So we will help the same group of people, but it's not something that I can take seriously, and it's not something that I'm going to basically like hash out a debate with as if it was something serious to talk about. Also, matters of historical controversy like this take a lot of work to clearly show what the problems are, and this is often not the right format for it. You're better off reading something in text, and I don't have the time to write something in text for you that's thorough on this. So it's not like it's some kind of dogma to hold Muhammad mythicism or something. Actually, you would authoritatively have to believe that he existed because the popes say that he existed and that he was a bad person. So it's at least authoritative. You don't have to believe it, but it's an obsequium thing. But if you just don't want to, if you don't want to like look into what Islamicist scholars have to say about the existence of Muhammad who aren't on that side, then that's up to you. I don't think that it's like I think that you have to be like actively trying to look into the modes of argumentation that are trying to find the best way possible to dismiss Islam most of the time, to come up with this. I think most people who are just trying to study the matter as a phenomenon and Islam as a historical reality, I think most of those people are not going to end up like even very thoroughly studying it. They're just not going to come up with weird theories like this.
Yeah, there's
that's the most I'm going to talk about this ever, by the way. So
yeah, and then I started this one, but how is that demonic? But cutting into your breast isn't. Well, I mean, if our claim was that like the miracle of X saint was the fact that they had like cut their flesh off, then yeah, of course, we would say that it's of demonic origin. But I mean, that isn't the claim that we're giving. Is that this is one of the miracles of X saint, is them, doing this crazily excessive thing that are present among them. Um, and I mean, there's also a very distinct difference between, cutting into your skin or somehow, causing other bodily harm and literally castrating yourself in public. Those are two, those are two very different acts. That's all I'm saying. Um, the Donner thesis. I don't know what the Donner thesis is.
What's up with Jack De Angelis? Is he does he want just like a bunch more like comprehensive anti-EO videos or something like
I don't know.
confusing?
Well, I mean, there's also certain people within the Orthodox tradition who say that it's a virtual distinction. Remember that one Russian guy, and then also Meyendorff as well. Um,
Also, it looks like a bunch of the people in the like pre-Bulgakov era of interpretation. Oh yeah, there's that one Russian guy from the 1800s, right? That we found.
no, he's contemporary.
No, the one mentioned by Tikhon Pino. Tikhon Pino gives like a chronology of interpretation of this issue.
Are we thinking about two different Russians? I think we are.
Yes, I think so.
Okay.
So there was a Russian archimandrite in the 1800s who wrote about it in a way that implies a real distinction.
um. Wait, what? Why can Byzantines chant this in their Sunday of Orthodoxy? Since Fidelium has a video of a Byzantine priest. Is this a Byzantine Catholic priest? Those who do not confess with heart and mouth that the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father alone, essentially and hypostatically, as Christ saith in the Gospel, anathema. Well, yeah, I mean, if somebody believed that, they're going to hell. So I don't know what's up with that. I'm assuming that it's not, and it's either somebody who's contradicting proper Byzantine rites, or it's somebody who is, maybe they just mistakenly got a video of an Orthodox priest rather than an Eastern Catholic priest. Okay. It looks like Palamas himself believed in a real one, to be honest. Yeah, I guess.
I think so too.
Yeah, maybe.
I still think
Maybe.
there's issues. Astro can articulate
I
it
think
better than me,
probably.
but I basically have the same concerns as Astro. Also, what he says about the filioque
Almost
implies that
necessity. Yeah.
it implies that he believes in in a real distinction. I think he believed in a real distinction on some days of the week and less than a real distinction other days of the week because the way he talks in some places seems like really clear that he's talking about a virtuality and like a like a definitional part, and in other places he like in the section on the filioque he like very clearly expresses that it's a real distinction. I think so. There's a problem.
No, Jack, have you read like the actual response of Adrian to the Carolingians? He doesn't say that per filium contradicts ex filium. He doesn't say that at all. If you like actually go into the volume of the Mignet set, read the response of Adrian. He doesn't say that per filium is correct and ex filium is incorrect. That's not at all what he says. He says that the forms are equivalent, and therefore that the Carolingians cannot condemn the East for confessing this. Zhugi, base Zhugi. Zhugi, I've read his volume on Purgatory, and I've read a good bit of his volume on the Filioque. I know that he has a series on Oriental theology, and then he has this one French book on the Immaculate Conception and the Eastern Fathers, which I've read like small sections of. Yeah, Zhugi, generally speaking, he's okay. Not super problematic. He didn't affirm what they taught.
Weird.
Well, Father Jugi is translated. It's just his work on purgatory is translated.
Yeah, that's like the only thing though.
Yeah, 1/20 of his corpus is translated. So he is translated. He didn't affirm what they taught. I don't know what you mean by this. So you've read Pope Adrian, and you're telling me that Pope Adrian said that the Spirit does not proceed from the Son. That's what you're telling me right now. Even though I read Pope Adrian because somebody was asking me about it like 2 years ago, and I just read through the whole thing. So, like, you have a direct citation. You're not just reading Szyszynski when he says that that's what they're doing. You actually have read it. Because Szyszynski, he says this, but Szyszynski's wrong about this. It's not what he says when you actually just read the primary source. Because it's not enough to just like read and gloss over whatever Szyszynski says about the Filioque and then assume that he's right about this. You want my stream on the Nouvelle Theologie? I don't think I've ever done a stream on the Nouvelle Theologie. I think I have like a clip about this. It's like 20 minutes long. Yeah. I think this is basically done. Sorry guys, you had to sit through the Discord, the resolution of the Discord drama. Apologies. Yeah. But it happened. Anyways, I'm gonna get going. Do you have anything else to say, Hassan?
No, I'm gonna sink some time into talking into kayak now.
Okay, well, you have fun with that. But anyways, thank you all for. How was North Dakota? It was fantastic. What spiritual theology question?
Let's go. He asked. Do you know any books that synthesize the theology of grace with the theology of prayer and connect it to the levels of the spiritual life? Doesn't Lagrange do that?
Well, I mean, all of the spiritual theology books kind of do that. I'm just trying to think about. Stages of Prayer would probably be Arentero has one on the Stages of Prayer.
And Arentero as well.
That would probably be, if you're specifically asking about the Stages of Prayer, I think that might be the best that I know of. I'm sure there's a bunch that I don't know of. But North Dakota was great. I will be having a stream later this week talking about it. I also have to do my 20K stream this week, and I have a few others that I wanted to do, but I only have 4 days of work this week because I'm traveling to Charleston for something else at the end of the week. But after that, I should be in town, I think. But yeah, I've been traveling a while. Our friend... what's his name? Why can't I remember his name right now? Jack DeAngelis. Our friend Jack DeAngelis did not answer the question of whether he's actually read Pope Adrian or whether he was just reading Szyszynski. Anyways,
every single guy is like, oh, but X person said this. Did you read them? No, but I read about it. Okay.
That's true. Would I do a Black Ops 2 zombie stream if I could actually figure out how to do that? But I probably cannot figure out how to do that, so probably not. But thank you, Hassan, and everyone else. I will talk to you tomorrow night. Bye-bye. I will talk to you tomorrow night. I don't know what kind of stream it's going to be. It might be with Pine Sap. We're seeing whether that's going to be the case. But that's it. And as always, God bless.
If you really enjoy this channel, please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/militant Thomist. At the first level, you get access to the private Discord. At the second level, you get access to weekly bonus videos. At the third level, you get access to free translations, articles, and notes on the Summa of St. Thomas. On the fourth level, you get access to course videos and DM questions. And beyond this, there are many other benefits, so please make sure to check out patreon.com/Militant Thomist. Do you want to have access to more videos and custom interaction whilst also helping out the channel? If so, please consider becoming a YouTube member. At the first level, for only $3 a month, get access to custom emojis to use in live streams and in the comment section. At the second level, for only $5 a month, get access to a weekly bonus stream. At the third level, for only $10 a month, get access to priority replies on all your comments. Click the join button below or the link in the description to find out more.